Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Make Love Easy podcast, where we help you with all things dating, relating, and mating. Ye successful professional men hiding behind keyboards, writing code usually. I have a great gift for you today, and it is my honor, privilege, and pleasure to discuss the spiritual journey of growth that one can engage in through polyamory with embodied relationship coach, pro dom, DJ, and co-founder of Holistic Kink, especially Kink Tank, Ashley Berry. Welcome.
Hi, Lewis. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and I love this topic. So thank you so much for having me here.
You're so welcome. I also want to
I,
acknowledge you. May I acknowledge you?
yeah.
So I think I don't even remember exactly what our first interaction was, but I know it was steeped in controversy and and talking probably either past or very much different directions from one another around polyamory. It was on the heels of me making grandiose generalizations to my social media about the nature of casual sex and polyamory, largely born of my own heartbreak, grief, and pain at the time. And I think I've evolved a great deal. The fact that this podcast is happening, I think, is a good sign of that. And yeah, your willingness to be generous, graceful, and spacious in holding a place for perspective that initially, from your early comments, seemed like it came off my perspective as sort of it, one might say like overblown on the low end, arrogant on the high end, oversimplifying, lacking nuance. Anyway, it's been a joy to engage with you in deeper ways. So thanks for being you.
Hmm. Thank you so much for that. And it's so appreciate your articulation of that, but the vulnerability, like there's like a humor in vulnerability right now and that acknowledgement of the inception of our conversation. And yeah, I felt so sweetly like engaged with from seemingly distinct or opposing viewpoints that I think really aren't, right? Like there's more nuance from from both perspectives, and it's been so easeful and really rich to have a little dialogue about this before we start talking today. So
Oh my gosh,
appreciate that.
you're
Yeah.
you're so welcome. Yeah, so I, it's funny. I love that you use the word inception. I think that was probably almost certainly not planned in that particular way. But yeah, I've tried polyamory a lot, but not as deeply as most people. And I've had difficult times and experiences, and I think it gets a bad rap. It really does from a lot of people who have not really put in. It's not that it's not possible to get benefit from it. It's that it requires a lot of effort and intention and self-awareness and skill. And I've observed most people, they explore it to some level of depth or degree, and then they experience something uncomfortable. And then they bounce out and they say, oh, it wasn't for me. That's not me. But then again, most of the discomfort in my past polyamorous engagements was something my partner was having to go through as I embraced the freedom and they did not. Until finally, the egg was on my face, so to speak, with my last partner who practiced and it left me completely spun out. And yeah, there, just as a prelude, my inroads to this is I think that there's a great spiritual depth there, but largely I've only experienced pain and suffering. So I'd love to hear your story with it and how you came to have the perspective around it that you do.
Mm, yeah. I So in some ways I feel like I almost just sort of stumbled into it. You know, it was intentional, but it wasn't something that I'd had this long-standing intention desire to exit the paradigm of non-monogamy or of monogamy. You know, I was in monogamous relationships from the time I started dating, 16, 17 until my early 30s. And that like worked fine for me. There's a lot in my wiring that's actually very, I don't have a lot of like I need to seek for somebody else, outside of my partners. So that wasn't really the impetus for me. Um, and it was like a series of relationships where I kind of caught myself in my own pattern of meeting somebody. Oh my God, this could be my partner. Having some of my own attachment stuff come up, which is, I think, at its core disorganized, but has moved towards like earned secure attachment now. And, we'll always see when it's tested where it really is. But kind of moving between anxiety, anxious, and avoidant in partnerships. Basically a lot of avoidant, and then the ones I really cared about would be like, oh, here's the anxiousness. And it felt like that anxious attachment was a lot of what would have me want to move a little bit more quickly into committed partnership.
Mhm.
And then, there were beautiful people that I was in relationships with, but not quite right compatibility or something. They were growth relationships. And after the one that ended when I was in my early 30s, from what I can remember, I think part of it was just wanting to slow down. Like, what if I really take my time and get to know more people and really kind of feel into what I want and who's out there, and not just focus into the first person that I feel a really strong connection with. So there was that. There was something about, it sounds a little counterintuitive, but there's actually something about slowing down the relationship escalator, right? Which people do through dating. Like dating is a thing, but for me, there was like some things here, and part of it was that I had observed a lot of people in polyamorous situations, um, and one side of that was that I was like, that looks complicated and messy and like a lot of energy and a lot of communication, and the way that people are doing it doesn't feel appealing to me at all. Like that was a lot of what I was seeing. And then I was in lovership with somebody who had two partners at one point and was the first person who I really saw doing it in a way um, that seemed like it was really harmonious, and that was also kind of able to share and explain about it in a way that opened something to me. So I will say that I feel a bit privileged in that regard in a couple ways. One is that I had already been studying a lot of different communication modalities and emotional intelligence work and psychology. And so I'd already been doing a lot of deep dive into my own experience in relationship and my experience of myself. So there was some foundational skills there that I think if I hadn't had, trying to learn those while also dealing with attachment stuff that came up and the complexity of communication or multiple people, probably would have been harder. And then the first partner I had where we really had a solid non-monogamous container was very experienced and was somebody who had also had a lot of those skills and kind of created a map that I got to just fold into and then refine and change things for myself. But there, I was kind of handed some really good tools and skills. So I feel like I had a little grace on my entry point there that that um that made the process easier than I think it often is. Yeah, that's my broad strokes overview.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, I hear the grace and the privilege. I've made the comparison sometimes that practicing polyamory can be like going to graduate school. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
intense. It requires skilling up. It requires like finesse and subtlety and dedication and devotion and discipline. And you may leave without getting any of what you wanted. That's some of my people who've been through grad school. What is it? The almost PhDs. Um, anyway, but
I
yeah,
like the metaphor.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I also see it that way too, that like there's a higher level of skill and capacity in relationship in general that gets yielded as fruit for those who embrace the process. I mean, I remember reading The Ethical Slut in 2012 and saying everyone and their grandmother who's in relationship should read this. Like just for the depths and subtleties of self-awareness and mastery that come from asking questions and investigating angles on oneself and one's programming or how one is engaged in self-care or not that aren't handed to us on a silver platter with the dominant paradigm of monogamy. I mean, nobody teaches us how to be good at relationship, so we have to teach
Mhm.
ourselves. And yeah, I guess polyamory is a crash course in making sure you learn.
Yeah, well, it puts it to the test for sure, you know, and it I don't inherently find it more difficult than monogamy.
Huh.
Um, I think there's challenges that present kind of in different ways in each of these paradigms. And I also kind of ascribe to like just like monogamy is not for everybody, like polyamory is not for everybody. And then there's a whole spectrum in between, and different relationships might really call forward different structures and ask different things of us. So I think there's a lot in that kind of between area. And for me, part of what really lubricated the whole process is pretty quickly I discovered my capacity for compersion, and it just felt really innate, like, and I know that it doesn't feel really innate, so like in terms of like speaking to sort of privilege or just like wiring, I was like, oh, I really like that experience, and that's something I never got to have in my monogamous relationships. And if for anybody who doesn't know, compersion is basically like sympathetic joy, specifically for seeing your partner or somebody that you love really, happy and fulfilled and in pleasure, sexual or otherwise, with somebody else. So there's like a real um, deep like joy and appreciation of that. And so that to me is like one kind of quality that can be cultivated, but I think comes in varying degrees of just like natural, that really helps. It's a lubricating factor for sure. Um, so I will say that there was something else you were saying uh, about just like the grad program piece, is that I didn't realize until I was in it how many relational skills are required. It's like this goes better if we're learning other, if we're having really good communication skills or like really clear agreements or really solid ability to kind of process and alchemize our emotions in service to connection rather than disconnection or protection. And all of that are like hard skills development, and soft skills development. But it's like, man, it just gets messier. It's like there's more factors, so it gets messier without those. So it kind of necessitates a speeding up of the learning process,
Mhm.
right? Um, and I would speak to monogamy as like there's going to be different edges, and it's totally valid also to be like, that's a little scary for me to go all the way that deep in with one person, that level of commitment, close the energetic container to that degree. I think there's so much value in there. And so I think there's gifts and like fears in both directions too.
Yeah, I fell in love with the subtle depth and intricacy of opening or not opening and when and how and to what extent one's relationship through Polywise. Have you read it?
I have not.
Oh,
No, I'm
it's so
familiar with it,
good.
but I haven't read the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I've read parts of it. I haven't finished it either, but it's like this sense of tempo and timing and sensitivity to where someone's specific individual nervous system programming, etc., is at. So I'll just run through a couple terrible examples of polyamory um, from my past, and then I'd love to hear your really great contrasts. Um, when I was in it was three relationships ago, and I was like hungry for variety and novelty, and she was massively triggered by just me having that desire. So we went to our mutual friend and coach who helped her to see, at least from his paradigm, the idea that for me to make someone else's sexual desires the cause or not of my happiness is codependent because I'm making them my God. I'm now the bitch of their desires, which may have been there for the entire relationship, have nothing to do with me, would be there even if we weren't in relationship. And so she got some coaching and she adjusted her mindset and she opened. There was this like window that opened into polyamory. And then I got flogged and made out with a girl at my birthday. It was cool. And then there were a couple weeks where she was kind of like on edge, waiting for me to do something with it. But I didn't because I was largely happy. And as we started in the green room talking about like opening the aperture invites like depth of growth and learning and all this other stuff, like I found myself wanting to have the freedom, but not exercising it, not actualizing it.
Mm,
So that window closed very ungracefully. um, to where if I was going to be in relationship with her, there was this regression back to the dominant programming and pattern and pathway she'd been following. So the next relationship, I was very clear from the outset. I was like, all right, you do not have to be on this adventure with me, but I am polyamorous. I will do my best to support you if and as you are new to this, but I am not responsible for your happiness. And so if you make some desire that I have or action that I engage in mean something that causes you pain, then that's on you. And I'm happy to support you with breakthroughs because me as a early effective coach, but also being in relationship, I made this mistake of like, oh, if my girlfriend's in something other than peace, love, and joy, and I have the tools to get her out of that, of course I should lean in and support her in that way. That's kind, that's compassionate. No, it's a fucking hero looking for significance and attention for his ego through saving a wounded bird. I had to go through that pattern several times, but where it left her and where I'm finally able to land, and this happened with one of my partners, and then the next one, sort of, I got karma, right? I got the same experience in reverse. Was I was like, all right, so I want you to know, like, if you want to be with me, I have the freedom to do it anytime with anyone, whatever I choose. And if you attempt to control or dominate my freedom, by making me responsible for your happiness, by me doing whatever, jumping through whatever hoops your ego or your nervous system thinks it needs in order to extract the right quantity and quality of significance from me so that it can feel better about itself. Like, fuck no, I'm not doing that. So one night I did some manifestation work to create a new redheaded sex partner. So 24 hours later, someone showed up into my world and it was weird because this was new. I had never done this in a relationship and then have sex with a new person. So there was this like weird putting my partner at arm's length to go indulge in the sexual experiences. And then the next day I was like, yeah, I feel really disconnected. And it wasn't comfortable or fun for her at all. In fact, later on in the relationship, she decided, oh, I tried this. I didn't really want it. I possibly was people pleasing just to accept being with you at all. And that ultimately was what happened with the next partner too. But as I look back, while all of that narrativization about ego and significance and like responsibility and happiness, it all still lands as true for me. There's a sense in which I could have vetted, like, oh, do you know what you're saying yes to? And are you willing to take on whatever skills are necessary to calibrate the impact of me being me instead of me repressing me or trying to people please and be something different for your monogamous nervous system? Like, I could have, there could have been a deeper vetting process, and there also could have been a level of sensitivity and awareness such that, okay, well, I don't have to choose this desire at this time with this person. I can maybe, I don't know, buffer a little bit more or wait or something. I mean, my spiritual teachers now would say, oh, you, if if one woman isn't good enough to make you feel better about yourself, then what do you really think two women is going to do for you? Because that's what the ego, and that's the assumption, my spiritual teachers, their assumption about polyamory is, oh, using one person as a chess piece on your board of feeling better about yourself in life. Like, oh, well, two is just going to make things more complicated. It's not ultimately going to solve the problem, which is the internal work. So anyway, I've said a lot. I'm sure you probably have a lot to say about that, but go ahead. What's coming up for you in relation to all this?
Yeah. Um, mm, there's a lot. I appreciate you sharing that story. And I guess the kind of thing that came up right as you were landing there was around, you know, making just decisions from ego and then from um I don't know, wholeness or love or like the the bigger ecosystem that the ego is a part of and gets to be a part of, but not just like the solo driver. And I just appreciate the self-awareness in your sharing because I think that that's one of the major things that's really, really helpful in this kind of non-monogamy paradigm is like super honest, like being really honest about our truth and where we're at, and not just eliciting consent, but informed consent, right? You spoke to that of like, oh, maybe I should have assessed if she knew what she was getting into. And like any spiritual path, and I consider this a spiritual path for me, like there's a learning curve. So it's like that whole process of being like, oh, that didn't go that well that time. Let me just like assess and maybe update whatever approach I have. So I'm just appreciating hearing an example of that because I've had just so many moments of that along the way of like, oh, that didn't go well at all. Like, okay, reassess. But I want to speak to the consent piece, I think, at first. One really direct thing I'll say is if somebody doesn't have any experience with non monogamy going into it, I'm probably really hesitant to be in relationship with them unless it feels really, no, even I'm very open to a relationship. I'm like, actually, no, yeah, I'm very open to a relationship coming into my field that feels like this wants to be a monogamous container. Um, I'm not closed off to that. I don't know that I could do that with somebody who has only ever been monogamous and doesn't have any, because at my core, I feel non monogamous. And I'm like, this could be a really long monogamous container, but there's other, like, how I dance with people, how I talk to people. Is there I'm a polysensualist through and through, always will be, never going to give that up. Like my friends and I cuddle, my friends and I like to do kink scenes together, my friends and I like to do contact improv and like, you know, be able to like move together and allow there to be the pleasure of erotic energy, even if it's not acted on in a sexual way. Like there are certain kind of uh, aspects of intimacy that are just characteristic of a lot of my platonic relationships now that so even at that level I'm like, oh, I want to know where somebody's at in terms of their comfort level, how do they engage with their community, um, and so that consent piece, it feels like a really deep nuanced conversation. Like how many times I can think of that I was like, oh, I thought we had consent here, but then I realized I didn't have a piece of information I needed, or you didn't have a piece of information you needed, and that shifts things. So like being willing to be in a communication refinement process feels really like, and ideally to enjoy those conversations as like, let's geek out about this together, is definitely helpful. If it feels like a slog, then like it might not be the best use of energy. But if it feels like, oh, this is kind of fun, we get to just like parse all this out. Yeah.
Yeah, this is so good. So my experience of consent, there's a necessity, like a demand in terms of fulfillment and effectiveness in this realm for fastidious rigorousness. And not just fire consent, like fully informed and enthusiastic and whatnot, but like there was one rock that I didn't turn over in my most recent relationship. We started polyamorous. This is 2022. And we had the better sex conversation. And I was like, all right. So, and I assumed that the same standard I had put into place with the previous partner that I had made explicit and clear, which was, oh, if we're going to go have sex with someone else, we're at least going to share about it and have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation. So I can consent to continuing to have you in my field if you choose to go be with someone else. and not veto power or anything, but just like awareness and care and sensitivity around this may have an impact on you if I do this thing. And yet that wasn't as explicit as I thought. We did the whole better sex conversation. And then 4 or 5 months in, she had sex with her former partner. And I didn't find out for months. And I was flabbergasted because I had been holding back the depth of intimacy we had already cultivated. Like it just felt incorrect to allow myself to even have sex with a woman who was in my bed around the same time as my partner when had sex with someone else and then didn't tell me anything. So when it showed up that this had happened, I was filled with betrayal and disgust and spun out. And so I thought she was consenting to a container that she actually wasn't. And the way that I read it in my book was her ego deactivated her avoidant attached nervous system in order to escape the growing intimacy and the fear of being abandoned the way her father had actually specifically abandoned her by the one with whom the intimacy was growing. And reaching out to a phantom ex, as is standard for avoidant attached people, and leveraging that as a release valve for the building tension. And we were able to recover from it, but it always sort of left this, it wasn't a seed of doubt. It was like, it was unsettled. And within like a couple months later, when I tried to do the same, not the same thing, but like I very communicatively said, all right, I want to go Om. I want to go orgasmic meditate with this person. She took responsibility for her trigger, went to get a breakthrough from our coaches, and realized, oh, I've never wanted polyamory. I've always only wanted monogamy anyway. And I'm like, what the fuck? And then I was just like, all right, well, I love what we've got, so I'll just go all in with monogamy. And so like my conclusion from all of this is that someone has to possess an extreme level of self-awareness, or else their consent will be either incomplete or founded on something that's not fully grounded. Does that make
Mm,
sense?
mm. Yeah, it makes total sense. It makes total sense. And then there's the response to those sort of consent mistakes, if you will, which is very distinct from a broken agreement. And I find in relationship in general, this is not just in non-monogamous relationship, but it's helpful there, is that um, distinguishing between responses we have to a broken agreement versus something that was a misunderstanding really it deserves being distinct from each other. And so agreements are just like step number one, like, right, and going really slow. Like that's one thing that I was really grateful to have been kind of brought into in my first partnership, was like somebody who had
Hmm.
come up with some agreements over time that was like, I think these things work really well. So, I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, which I was really grateful for. And I've been able to build on a really solid foundation, which is lucky. Um, but it's like, pause. Like, we get to pause, like, in any conversation we have, if a young part comes up, if there's a trigger or whatever, like, okay, let's just pause. Something shifted, something started to wiggle. Can
Hmm.
we? That's a simple thing. That is not easy. I did not find that easy. Like,
Yep. Yeah.
especially in the moment where you're like this thing, it's like just like slow everything down. So that is a foundational relationship agreement, um, and a shared practice of like how quickly can we catch get when we get hooked, and then just like slow it all down until like, okay, my adult self is back online. But then in like a non-monogamy agreement specifically, like, one of the agreements that I had with that partner that I'll keep, that I like, because it was a primary partnership. We didn't actually have outside partners in that. We had people we connected with, and it was always really deep, and there were, you know, powerful connections, but not, this is a partner I'm going to build a life with, who then there's kind of a flow of communication happening in the same way that it is with my primary partner. That wasn't our agreement. So that's one like version of a non-monogamy agreement. It's sort of an emotional monogamy, even though there's deep emotional connections in other places. It's like we're not attaching building life together in the same way. Um, so in within that structure, one of the pause agreements would be like, okay, if we go out, be free, flirt, do your thing, whatever you want. We have a hand signal. If at any point one of us is starting to have some kind of uncomfortable feeling or just needs the other one for a moment, we just like give a hand signal and we have the agreement that we'll wrap up whatever we're doing and we come check in. Just something as simple as that that serves building that secure attachment and like, okay, this is a priority. We're nurturing this. And we didn't have like veto power per se, but there was a conversation where everything that we brought in to our own lives or connection outside connections would be like, does this serve our primary container? And if it doesn't serve the primary container, then like maybe we don't do that. Is it worth it? And for me, what I found served most was that I would be having these conversations with my partner, like, we're mirrors for each other, things come up. And then all of a sudden now I have a different mirror and I get to go and I get to experience myself in connection with somebody else. I get to learn more about myself. I get to go back to my partner, bring more of myself back to my partner. And then we deepen in our primary connection within that kind of more like emotionally monogamous version of non-monogamy. And there are many, many, many. I happen to like that one. And I can share a little more about what I'm doing now, which is more like a solo poly exploration, which is also lovely. But just speaking in the context of that, it was like those kinds of agreements, as well as that orientation, coming back to your point about discerning what's coming from ego, is like, oh, if we're both devoted to the bigger container of the relationship, then it helps mitigate a little bit of the risk that the ego is going to drive. And it's like, well, I'm not going to go just do this thing because I want some validation right now. I'm going to have to slow down and consider, what's this going to bring into my partnership, or what's this going to give me as an individual that I can then bring into my partnership. And often it was things that I would go and like get reflection from somebody else and be like, hey, remember that thing you told me? Okay, it was easier for me to receive from that person and now I get it. Like there's a like, and times when I'd be like, hey, do you want to go connect with somebody else? Maybe like, maybe there'll be some discovery there and then I won't have to be the one to like be mirroring all the things. Like we get to like spread out
Huh.
um the kind of reflective field, if you will.
This
Yeah,
could lead to
there's
a
like
whole
more fractals to look at.
yeah that there's like a podcast series I'm feeling called Demystifying the Spirituality of Polyamory potentially here. Um, which which is tantamount to a soft invite to return. You can take it as such, but like the subtlety of the mirror conversation, that's cool. That's interesting. Because in my training, everyone and everything is a mirror, and it appears without though it is within. Don't try to shave the mustache off the mirror. If I'm triggered by something that's going on outside of me, something my partner is reflecting to me, something they are doing to me or have done, then the first place to go to restore myself to peace, love, and joy, my birthright of bliss, is inside of me. So I can pull the weed from my garden that led to the fruit that I'm experiencing. And I would often see this when I would lead my past two relationship partners through releasing the core triggers that led to them making up meanings about my sexual desires, which was kind of an addictive process because I was like, I mean, there's a like facilitator's itch and not arrogance, but like brashness. There was a sense of, oh, probably everything that will trigger you about this polyamory is based on a meaning that is held on to by some part that had some experience in the past. So if we can resolve that, if we can untie that knot, then you'll be available for us to embrace the possibility of more love with more people, like giving and receiving, and also perceiving more mirrors around us. So, like, if my partner is my mirror and they reflect back to me where I need to go to work on myself to advance or evolve in love and grace or the embodiment thereof, then of course, if there are more mirrors, then that process is going to multiply or magnify or increase dramatically in speed. This is the argument I used to say. And at the same time, the subtlety I heard in your speaking is not everybody is, I mean, it's physically true. It's vibrationally and energetically true. If somebody's in partnership with me, for sure, there's going to be like a subconscious and a superconscious pull for them to reflect back to me what I already believe. But they're not going to be identical with me, not in the way a true, like outside of the metaphor mirror would be. So different people carrying different soul level karma are going to reflect and resonate and reverberate in different ways, that fundamental dynamic.
Mhm.
So that adds a whole world of subtlety that I would have never considered that makes polyamory more interesting. Um, and I love your agreement. I with the hand signal, because I'd much rather have a hand signal than like a rupture. And as I look back on my where I gave the example of her sleeping with her former partner, which is like a really, it's like advanced ninja level thing. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna go flirt with a friend of ours or something, or I'm gonna go to a play party. It's no, I'm gonna go have sex with someone who I used to be intimate with, who was in the spot that you're in now. And
Yeah, it's about the most charged, one of the most charged choices you
yeah,
could make.
you can't get
Yeah,
any more difficult.
I wouldn't recommend it. Like just as a objective, if I were to be direct about it, I'm like, I wouldn't recommend that. But like it's
Was
yeah, it's like it's all learning.
yes.
Like, oh, that was a big deal. That was a lot.
Thank God it's all learning is possible. And like the trouble for me is if you drop a plate, you can apologize for the broken plate. You can replace the plate, but the plate has been broken.
Mm,
That doesn't change. Just because you're like, oh, let's create an agreement around that, or let's. And I did. I have her on audios. Like, I wanted to make sure our agreements were fucking super clear. And I was like, here are the agreements. You get to stay with me if you honor these. If you don't, then it's fine. But I would have to put myself at risk of experiencing this again. And
mm,
and yet, I think what I used to say, I'm seeing embodied in you when it comes to polyamory, which is like, if anything causes me to experience something other than peace, love, and joy, it's because of something in me. And polyamory is like a very richer sandbox to play in, to find and hunt down hijacks and triggers, to cause
mm,
and like bring it on. What insecurities do I have, or what programming do I have about how my partner needs to show up to stroke my ego in the right way at the right time in the right quantity, because they're like a dog that I need to train to give me the right love language so that I can feel better. No, they're a person and I'm a
mm,
person. And if my nervous system has a habit of making their behavior mean something, then where does that come from? And how can I strip away that layer of constraint to be more free to give and receive love through and within however they show up or however my world shows up? Does this
mm.
land? Does this capture any amount of your experience or
Yeah, well, I am thinking about what you said before about the feeling of freedom, but it not necessarily meaning that it needs to be acted on all the time. So I notice my mind is circling back to that as you're talking, as like really honoring the sovereign soul journey. There's something there that's very powerful. And what you were saying at the beginning kind of speaks to about the mirrors and the function of the multiple mirrors. It speaks to one of the core things that keeps me here, in part because um it feels correct, like it feels correct, and it feels um nourishing. The non-monogamy structures that I'm in feel nourishing. I'm always willing to reassess if they stop feeling nourishing, but on a spiritual level, and you look at my astrological chart and it's all over that, just everything is about relationship, like for this system. And for all of us, right, we're all learning in relationship, but it's like especially heightened here. And so for me, there's something about my soul's sovereign exploration and service to my own evolution and the way that my evolution serves. Like cultivating these things internally means that I am able to be more of service in the realm that I'm drawn to be. And so that to me is like underneath all of that is like
Mhm.
I'm not interested in like generally in like when I was with that partner we were together for 5 years, I was never seeking to replace him. There was never a like I need another partner. There was like I just met somebody and something sparked in my soul. And like I have to be able to investigate when someone comes into my field. And I'm just like, whoa, everything about my being is like, there's something here that you need to learn. And most of the time, and this I started talking about in the green room, but it's really worth mentioning. I didn't follow so many of those, like something very vital life force energy, like something just presented itself to me through this person. And I would shut those things down when I was in monogamous containers pretty early on because my conditioning had me immediately associate that kind of spark with something romantic or sexual. It wasn't until I was in a non-monogamous container with the freedom to take a couple more steps in the direction of the attraction that I discovered 90% of the time the attraction isn't leading towards something that's sexual or romantic. Mostly it's like this is a fun flirtation in this moment. There was a conversation that needed to happen just now and we never talk again. This is a creative collaboration. This is a business collaboration. This is like a friend. This is like there's like so many other things, but in my own kind of Disney fantasy wiring, anything that was like attraction was like, oh, are you my person? Are you my person? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? So just signing, I was putting that mask on everybody that came into my field. And I wasn't really able to let that go until I got to experience those connection in the way that actually felt cleaner because I had that like role that I was always seeking for filled in my life. And then suddenly I could see people clearer and the acceleration of my own soul and like relationship evolution went so quickly once I was able to open that aperture to be like, wow, it would be a disservice to my own spiritual journey to because I'm trying to like protect somebody else
Mhm.
or follow what culture told me I was supposed to do or protect myself from getting attacked in some way or stay small or all of these things that I like found I was doing in the version of monogamy that I was doing. Not to say everybody's doing that, but I was doing that. Um, that was very clearly limiting my spiritual growth because so much of that for me comes through relationship.
Unsettling in the most beautiful and delicious way. Um, like, so what I heard is the dignification of soul as a compass, or desire in the soul as a compass for spiritual growth. And like, there's this capacity that opens when we open the aperture. That reminds me of like Star Trek the motion picture where they've got like this big alien being open the aperture. But yeah, it's I mean it is kind of wild, interesting alien world. So like this dynamic, organic, holistic unfolding of whatever my soul is meant to experience with the person in front of me, divorced from cultural mediation or control or constraint or restriction. Like, I love that. And we were also talking about the like tribal social nutrition that can arise in the space of someone who maybe has a lot more platonic intimacy because they're not following the traditional mold of like insecurity, ego, programming driven need for partner to fit into a certain box and mask. So
Mm-hmm.
I love this. Um, and
Yeah.
I also, my Vedic astrology chart is woven through with relationship obsession. So I feel you on that. And
Yeah.
a hunger for more than the bare bones superficial simplicity of like surface level relationships. So yeah.
Yeah, and in service to something bigger, right? Like it's like the ego's always going to be there with its things and whatnot, but like connecting that cord to, or that like that pipeline between like, whoa, we're all fractals of each other, and I have this person in front of me, and I feel very drawn to like something is coming through here. What is it? Um, and then like rather than that just being like, oh, I want an ego boost, like it's like, whoa, we had a 10-minute conversation and they told me something, could be something silly, like they told me about this book I needed to read, and then I read that book and it changed my life. And like maybe if I was trying to protect the feelings of a partner, uh and I want to emphasize that like all of this can be done in monogamy, like all of this, like creating those freedoms, at least this piece that I'm talking about, creating that freedom to be like, I'm so glad you're following your draw, like, because sometimes there's jealousy that comes just at the level of like, my person is talking to another person, there's not even like a thing going on, right? So it's like, we get to start to catch all of that too. And that might be the level that's like the right edge. Not everybody needs to, I think, to go all the way into like, let's go into like deep romantic sexual connection to explore this. It could just be like, what is my response when my partner is talking to somebody else,
Mhm.
talking to somebody else that they're attracted to? Um, that could just be about something they need. It's not a threat, which is like, that attachment ego work, and what you said about earlier about just like these, like, this is a person in front of me. This isn't somebody who's meant to like meet these needs of my ego. Is like, we get to be in that like expansive space of like sovereign soul exploration while still caring for the human who's like here in front of us, and letting that inform our pacing as well. Like if there's care there, and be like, well, if the ecosystem is the priority, like I want to be free, but like maybe I'm down to slow down so that we don't have to do a bunch of energy to like clean something up. Maybe that's the right move. Maybe I still get what I need, but like, thank you for actually, like, your system said slow down. And then once I slowed down, I realized that was actually better for me too. Um, it's like really becoming like a tuning fork together in that way.
I love there were a couple things that came up as you were speaking. I think you'll probably resonate with this, Reed, that the ego is not our identity ultimately, but that it's an instrument for the evolution of love. And within that, the faculty of desire, like for me, it's been real new this year to accept that pleasure could give me a good direction. Like, like not just a nice erection, but a good direction for life. Like, like it's still so unsettling and uncomfortable. The and part of me has evolved intuitively to like follow my desires and to create from there, from my inspiration. But there are other areas. So to get vulnerable, I was part of a high control group that was undistinguished as such. The cult-ish of my book title. I'm now in the inquiry as to whether or not I abdicated my sovereignty over my soul's journey in exchange for taking on the distinctions of that community and receiving belonging from that community in periods when I was very alone and in despair and desolation. And so, like, for me to look at, like, wow, it's okay to have desires. They don't need to be sort of brutally regulated, constrained, and controlled by the mind in service of some sort of higher ascension or use of the energy. Um, and then there's the question of like discerning which desires when and with whom, because not all desires are rational, much less productive or supportive. So like that's an entirely other world. And then making sure that someone's sexual desires are no longer mediated by culture and programming and trauma, that they're emerging and arising from some deep, real, authentic place inside of them. Like that's, I think, the work. Because it is possible. You've really stood strongly for this, that a apparent sexual or romantic or connection desire with someone can actually be a portal, an opening of an aperture to greater healing, transformation, learning, growth, whatever. And there has to be some criteria for vetting or qualifying. I mean, at which point it then begins to sound like a very rational game of like, all right, well, brunettes are dangerous. Like I can imagine some guy making up a shitty story like that or whatever. Like, all right. And so how do you discern when a desire, or do you discern that some of your desires are from soul, leading you into expansion versus not?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying I always discern correctly, but sometimes we learn through experience. Um, yeah, but like for me, I'm gonna talk just kind of about my own work with my psyche in a moment. But I want to speak to something that you just said that kind of pulled in the piece I was saying about becoming a tuning fork together. Like if we're in a version of non-monogamy where there's a primary partnership,
Yeah.
um, all of a sudden we have an ally in discernment. I mean, that's another experience I had was like, I've never gotten to date with somebody else that like I'm in this deep of a relationship. Like it's like I'm dating, but I'm not alone. I'm not alone, which means I can have somebody to check things with. I do that with friends and things, but like with the level of like merging that comes in partnership, and I'm talking about like all versions of that, but like in a healthy way, there's like, oh, cool, we're learning how to navigate together. And like, it could be direct, it could be like, hey, I'm like having this conversation with this person over here, and then being like, what's your read? What's your vibe on what this is? And like getting input and being like, thank you for like helping me discern here. And it can be kind of indirect where it's like, I'm moving in this direction, my partner's resistant. Maybe I'm used to my partner being supportive, and all of a sudden my partner's resistant. And if I honor their system and their body, their heart as an instrument that is an ally for me, then I might be like, well, my desire is pulling me really strong, but I actually have an ally right here who's going into something that requires a slowdown. And that's really helpful information because they might have just helped me slow down and avoid something that was actually a desire that wasn't going to go in a good direction. So just to speak to like utilizing our partners, trusting. There's a lot of trust in there, trusting that they're not trying to like sabotage something, but like, no, I care about you and I'm picking up on something. Let's do this together. That has been like so mind blowing and like fun for me to be like, oh my God, I don't have to like just be discerning all on my own. Um, so that's huge. And then the other piece I'll just mention is that internal family systems and parts work has been incredibly helpful, um, along with other systems for mapping the psyche. But the more I engage with systems that help me distinguish who are the parts that are talking, like I hear a voice that tells me to do a thing. Do I understand where that's coming from, who it is, what it needs? It's a part of me. And like that's been a long process, but my discernment improves in tandem with my ability to kind of track all of the parts of my own psyche and who's talking and what following them usually leads to. And then staying in the driver's seat, like it's driving a van full of kids around and being like, I'll listen to everybody's input, but I'm gonna like, if I'm the higher self part that's connected with soul and some compass that's really deeply rooted in love and um, something bigger than my ego, then like I'm going to be the final decision maker, and I will take into account the parts, all the perspectives of all the parts. But um, so that's, yeah, there's a lot I could say there, but I just want to say that tool, like internal family systems parks work. Also, Bill Plotkin from the Animist Institute has a map called the nature-based map of the human psyche. That's been incredibly helpful. It overlays a lot with internal family systems. So I've found tools like that have helped me distinguish the noise so I actually feel connected to who's making the decision when a desire arises. That feels like the bigger than anything. It's like not even what's the desire to the decision. It's like who's making the decision here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this. That was graceful and elegant and powerful and precise and potent. Like this intersubjective triangulation of desire. Like,
Mhm.
hey, it's a good idea. Like, you know me, you know what's good for me. You've been taking the time to get to know me. We're also assuming that their nervous system is unbiased to a certain
Mhm.
degree, like they are actually voting my victory or standing for my highest good to some degree, rather than, as you say, like some contamination of their insecurity or ego or whatever. And like, that's awesome. Did you ever see Californication?
I didn't. No, David Duchovny.
Yeah.
No, I did not see that.
Yeah, so the most shamelessly dysfunctional form of the opposite of what you're talking about happens there, where like everybody's kind of like seeing him chasing a new woman and trying to make it work with this woman that he loves and his kids, and it's like complicated and convoluted, and I was just imagining that whole show, like what if they were on a team and he actually took the feedback, right, to follow
Mhm.
what would support his highest good. And and then as you were talking about IFS, one of my spiritual teachers, what he says is the heart is one, the mind is split.
Mhm.
So the heart or the soul, we are able to get access once we filter for or sort these different parts that came into existence as fracturing of our primevally um, unitary being through trauma and through life and whatnot. And yeah, I hold faith that it's possible for people to arrive at that soul level certainty and clarity, like tuning out the noise of the kids in the back seat so that the signal is clearer. I just also imagine that it's probably a challenging process, especially if the person has a strong mind that they've been buying into different parts of for a long time.
Really long. I've found it to be a really long and challenging process. And I don't know that I think it's probably easier for some people and harder for other people, but the amount of din, the amount of like, you know, chaos in all of the people yelling at once was just like, and I'm not talking about like dissociative identity disorder here. I'm just
Yeah.
talking about, parts get split off a bit and we have different, some of it it's like the voice of my mom or the voice of my dad, or like, is that even my voice that's talking right now? But there is this, I found there was a point where it started to get clearer and quieter. And even if it's not so accessible to kind of map that out in the psyche that way, the body is a really good tool. And so there are aspects of pleasure or desire. Like I know for sure if I have a desire to feel the pleasure of going to the Yuba River in Nevada City, which where I live sometimes, and getting in the river and laying on a hot rock and spending 3 hours there, there's no part of me that questions whether that's going to be a good thing for me to do. That's a like 100%. I know that that's good for me. Or like I have a desire to drink some like really healthy bone broth. I'm like, that's great. That's safe to follow. Then there's ones that I'm like, either through past experience or gut feeling, I'm like, something wants me to move towards that thing. And like, I can tell with this other feeling that that's not a good direction. And then in all the gray area, sometimes I feel like the best I can do is shepherd myself through my own experiential learning with as much grace and compassion and sort of diligence about data collection as I can. And so if there's things I don't know yet, and it's like I mentioned, I'm a pro dom, I have a kink background, so there's a lot of exploring edges there, and really like that's been one modality that's been very helpful for me in a lot of ways. But part of it is like mapping my system, um, and being able to move towards a desire and then have an integration after where I actually feel what's going on in my body. Like, how does my body feel? How does my heart feel immediately after, the next day, a week later, a month later? And if I'm paying attention to what's happening in my own system, as well as kind of in my relationships or in my world, if there was like a relational aspect to moving towards the desire, usually there's a lot of information available there. And if I can be self-compassionate, if the information shows that maybe that direction didn't serve me, I find that the integration of the learning happens a little more quickly. Whereas if I shame myself about it, that part tends to go a little more into hiding and is more apt to come out sideways later. So to be really like really honest self-reflection of like, what were the results of that acting on that desire? And did it serve me? And if it didn't, can I be gentle with myself about that and, you know, commit to choosing different next time?
Yeah, so this is really high level shit. I like this. It's like it's like how incisively straight can we be with ourselves? And how can we leverage the trial and error of indulging or honoring the ask of different parts of ourselves while still holding them lightly enough to understand that there may be a fundamental irrationality to this part that wants to go and do 2CB and get an Airbnb with your former partner who's now dating someone else. Like, I mean, it's fascinating. And I can see how spiritual growth would come of it because the downstream fruits are like ideally honoring desires that are supportive of the larger ecosystem of
Mm-hmm.
your holistic health and well-being and that of everyone around you. Have you found that to be the case for yourself as you're like evolving through these iterations?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. My relationships in my life has, I mean, I have a lot of things popping up in my field right now that are kind of interesting
Hmm.
tests coming that feel like a lot of like, oh, I have to, get even more refined in my boundaries work and things like that. But by and large, committing to care for the ecosystem, and I'll say this specific to non-monogamy, just to like, you know, loop it into this topic, caring for the ecosystem over my personal desires when it has to do with what's happening in the relationship,
Hmm.
even if it means I have to go slower than I want, or I don't get something, or I don't get as much of something as I want, it very consistently leads to more harmony. And it might require some levels of adjustment or sacrifice or patience, but I'm like, I'm committed to the ecosystem, like, and from a like meta version of like our relationship to nature, it's like I'm very
Uh-huh.
rooted in like it's going to serve the holistic health of the whole organism, whether that's like Gaia or like a polycule or like our relationship. Is like what's good for the ecosystem is good for me. What's good for the ecosystem is good for me. What happens if I really anchor myself in that? Um, and it's not always easy. Not always easy. Sometimes what's good for the ecosystem requires me to relinquish a personal desire. Um, and sometimes at extreme levels, it's like that can't be in that ecosystem anymore. Maybe it's too much sacrifice, but yeah, and all of it, what I've found, and one of the things I've found at the core that's probably the hardest, been one of the hardest things to practice, but has served me the most, is that generally caring for the ecosystem requires slowing down, and usually slowing down to a level that's uncomfortable for most humans. Like, and I think it's very uncomfortable for us to slow down and really listen to the needs of an ecosystem. Um, that's what I've experienced anyway. But
But
it's
there's a signal there if you listen for it, is what I'm hearing.
mhm,
Like actually ecologically is what you seem to be implying beyond just me caring for the container and the connection of the superorganism that comes of my I mean, what was it? Fucking Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Matthew. The two shall become one flesh. This is true
mhm,
on a attachment level, neurological, psychophysiological level. So if somebody indulges in creating that level of relationship, then yeah, me caring for you is caring for me.
mhm.
Which, makes me sound like I'm really excited about Christian scripture. I try not to be these days, but I have an approach
Anytime,
aversion relationship with Christ. Um,
I'm all about Christ consciousness, so bring it in anytime.
whole conversation there. Yeah, so Just to finish some of these threads that you sparked, and then we can complete, because I honor your time. We've gone a little over time. Um, is my person. I loved that phrase. Like, and how it deliberately distinguishes when someone thinks they need a my person, A, and B, are masking people to seek that, and how it betrays the holistic unfolding of whatever's available in front of them. One of my spiritual teachers, he says, you're not good enough for your family. You were never meant to be. And it's like, oh, yeah. So my person was never meant to be good enough for me. Like, it's not their job. It's not their responsibility. And so this is where it sort of does a U-turn and comes all the way back to what you were just talking about, is for me that hand signal or that sacrificing of desire for the sake of the ecosystem. Back in the day, that would have smacked, that would have tasted, that would have had the flavor to me of codependence. Like, oh, I need to bend over. I need to exterminate or extinguish or diminish my self-expression in service of someone else in what they're up to. And so, like, my curiosity, my inquiry is how one can be about that practice of deepening sensitivity to honoring the ecosystem of the relationship without breaking one's sovereignty. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're talking about moving from like codependence to interdependence. And interdependence requires and this is part of why my coaching practice is so centered on boundaries work, because the boundaries are just the kind of designated the area of like, this is where I'm choosing to exist. This is where I'm available. This is how I want to relate. I'm going to invite you in here. I'll let you know where the boundaries are so that we can ideally have a connection that's more aligned and that honors each of us as sovereign beings. So find containment to be a really important piece of that. And boundaries are a practical way to create a container for ourselves to exist. And then what I've found in there for me is somebody who, I grew up with addiction and alcoholism in my family. And so there was an alcoholic codependent dynamic happening there. And I've gone to Al-Anon and I've had to work through codependence a lot. I've found non-monogamy to be a helpful practice for that for me. But, among others, but I think it's a great question because it's also nuanced and it feels like one of those things where it's like, I'm tracking that. I don't just, I'm not like, I'm in an interdependent state now. I'm like, ooh, that was codependent. That was a codependent thought, or that was a like impulse to overextend myself or to try to manage somebody else. Like, so it's like catching things at subtler and subtler levels is helpful. Like if I'm paying attention, I'm like, oh, I just watched that start to slide to codependence. So what's like, usually it's like, what's actually honest for me right now?
Mhm.
And I think it might be helpful to give an example to your question of like how to navigate that. So one of my closest relationships right now is somebody who invited me into their relationship, and they have an open marriage, and um, he was wanting to explore um, with a woman for the first time ever. And his husband was like, hell yeah, do it. You've been telling me this since before we even had, like, since our first date. And then um, you know, the unfolding of the depth of our connection required them to then kind of reassess, like, oh, we had an open marriage, but it was very compartmentalized. This person's is a friend, it's woven in, we fell in love, like, and then what the ecosystem required was a super slowdown, like conversations between all of us. And so for me, it was like there was an assessment, and it's an ongoing assessment, but it's like, wow, this is so nourishing what we're getting in this relationship. And we can't just like dive first, let's like, I'm going to be another partner to you, like that's not what's available here right now. But like, how do we kind of titrate and, you know, most of it, I'm like, I don't know, this just feels really good. And then there's a moment when I was like, oh, I'm spending a lot of energy thinking about this, and we're spending a lot of energy kind of talking through this. And we both actually have other things in our lives we need to tend to. So let's turn the dial down on that. We can be connecting over these other things, but actually let's like put to rest the sort of trying to figure out how this is going to work and just enjoy what's here, because there's like a lot consented to. Um, and and that it was interesting because it felt like kind of scary to say at a level. Like I was like, I can't keep putting this much energy into this, you know. It's coming out of balance. But it ended up being a very easy conversation and like a subtle adjustment. But the subtle adjustment was kind of more of an energetic shift that like happened naturally because we were willing to be honest with what was happening with our energy and feeling like, okay, let's just stop doing the thing that's taking it and see what happens. And then it kind of just like righted itself.
Hmm.
So an example.
As with
I don't know if that
lots of
answers the question.
ecosystems, right? I mean, that's I love this metaphor of the ecosystem because if you are no longer resisting, one of my mentors, he says success is structural and not personal. So we don't have to fix ourselves. We simply get into the right habits of focus and then behavior, and then things go better or become more productive or whatever. So what I'm hearing in your speaking is like this, you took attention off the sticky spot and you allowed it to flow elsewhere, and then things just went better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say that like knowing our I just want to say like knowing your role, like, and it doesn't, don't think it totally captures because people can use it as like, know your role. And I'm not saying it like that. I'm like, but like, it's a respect thing, I'm like, y'all's marriage container is the primary. I only want to be a value add. So, I'll take care of myself and just like make sure that it's working for me. But outside of that, like, I'm not the one who dictates the pacing here. And I'm I want it to serve the primary relationship because that's the way that I like to do that. And if I'm in a primary relationship and somebody else is coming in, I'm expecting that from them. I'm communicating that clearly and being like, and it's not, I don't view it as hierarchical as much as like concentric circles. I know some people have issues with sort of like hierarchical polyamory. I think we get to all just choose whatever we want and you can opt in or out. If you don't like that somebody's in a primary partnership with maybe higher levels of commitment, then like don't engage there. But for me, it's just about care and respect and be like, it actually makes it easier for me to know where to put any desires I have that might be outside their agreements. It's just kind of like, well, my priority is this. So it's actually makes it a lot easier to be with or let go of something else because it's like, well, that's just not what the relationship is asking for. So like, why would I try to make it something it's not? And um, I think kind of regardless of what positions we're in or where we're angling ourselves, like being really honest about the priorities, and about wanting to support everybody in the ecosystem to thrive, um, which sometimes means like, I was very clear. I was like, if this ever isn't a value add, if it feels like it's disruptive to your marriage, like I happily see myself out, like, and we can be friends, like, and I won't have hard feelings about it. Like, I might be sad, I might be a little heartbroken, but like, I'm not going to be upset because it's like, that was what I consented to coming in. So kind of comes back to that informed consent too. If I hadn't been oriented to the container beforehand, then I might have been had different feelings about it. But
Yeah, it's a very like ancient Greek virtue style, like rational governance of desires relative to commitment. Like it's like I'm not here to, this is how I want the results of my actions to show up. Like these are the fruit that I want to produce. So I'm not gonna just say, oh, my desires are paramount or my particular, feelings about the thing are paramount. And even then though, it's still kind of I acknowledge you, like this style of relating and perceptively engaging with potential like polyamorous situations, it's threading the eye of a needle. It really is. That's how it occurs for me. I don't know if it's that way for you. You look like that landed. Go ahead.
Oh, it's just hilarious that it's been like an 8 year, like a phrase that keeps coming through. And I had an I Ching reading the other day that was like, you are threading, and it wasn't around this particularly, but it was like, you are threading a needle right now. So it's just a theme that there's like, oh, I'm like, there's a, it's like a very nuanced navigating of relationship that wherever I've come to is requiring of me. There's something about power and responsibility and um, being willing to continue to like take on the level of responsibility that comes with the up level um, that feels increasingly sometimes like threading the eye of a needle.
Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel stressful in the way that it used to. I think it used to feel stressful. Now it's just kind of like basically it's like sailing or something, with a ship. You're like, you never just like lock in and
Yep.
go straight. It's always micro adjustments. So
Mhm.
relationally, spiritually, that's where I feel like I'm at is I'm like, okay, I've been working on catching things subtler, which means that I'm constantly making these little micro adjustments, but it's kind of becomes more of a I used to waitress and it was just such a fun dance to be like, ooh, this move around this person. Like,
Yep.
I guess that's kind of what I mean by like, if it's fun, then great. If it's stressful, then like, great, there might be juice there, but like, it's always like weighing it out.
That was a really
And
good
on the
summary.
desire piece,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. There was one more thing I was going to say about the desire. If I know what my core values are
Huh.
and a desire arises that would require me to betray or bypass my core values, that's usually a pretty good piece of information to stay away.
That's like the least like fangs in that statement. Like that's like the most gentle, loving version of like there was no like, oh, for me to violate the values is a betrayal. No, it's like that's useful information. It's you can still do it. It's not bad and wrong. It just like might leave a terrible taste in your mouth. It's like really cool.
Yeah. And then you get to deal with that. I had an 8 year old tell me once that like I reflected things in a way that felt like getting hit in the face by a pillow, which was a compliment. I just thought of that when you said that. And also what a brilliant 8 year old. I was like, I feel really seen. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Ugh. So I guess we'll close with this question. And I've got the beginning of the sketch of an answer that I think it'd be fun to lead with and hear your thoughts on. But where is the soul going? Because if we're following intuition, we're following desire, it's leading us through chaotic and interesting spaces in relationship. Like, what what are we here for, really? And I think you and I share this affinity and affection for the threading the eye of the needle through digging into the deepest subtleties of relationship and having it be the most nourishing and delicious and delectable and delightful it can be. And like, I definitely see that here. And for the people listening who are maybe just beginning to or watching just to explore this, I think it's useful to have some framework. I'm going to give the 5 levels abbreviated, and then you tell me if you resonate or where you think we're going. Um, so most of the planet is and this may sound really linear and structural and even what is it, phallogocentric in its rationality, but I found it to be some of the most beautiful and empowering, places to stand in supporting people. So level one is this disorientation, where people are living from a pool of poison and pain called big and little T trauma, stuck in the past, hoping for a magic pill, and a lot of awesome alliteration, apparently, to bring them happiness, where maybe someday their life conditions will match what they think they should be. And that most of the world doesn't realize, oh, I'm actually responsible for changing my life conditions. I have a capacity in that regard. You and I steep deeply in personal development and growth and IFS and all the things like, oh, that's like, yeah, that's where we live and breathe and have our days and nights. And so like, yeah, polyamory I think would be a big, so I'll check in with conscious polyamory at each level, right? At this level, I think it would be just incendiary. Like, how dare you? That's scary and fuck. I'm already not happy. You want to make my wife fuck someone else? Like, no. Right. And then we get into level two, which is like, okay, well, maybe happiness comes from me changing my life conditions or fulfilling my desires for the reconfiguration of my environment. So instead of being disoriented, now I'm goal oriented. The purpose of my life is to fulfill my desires, not realizing that most preferences are programming, a blueprint not built for us, not built by us, not necessarily going to make us happy. And if we run on that treadmill to the carrot at the end of the stick, we might be happy, for about 10 seconds until we get a desire for the next wife or the next house or the next work or whatever. And it's tricky because garden variety desires for most people do seem to be irrational for a lot of people a lot of the time, and or they seem to be operating out of programming and trauma that again wasn't built to serve them. And yet there also does seem to be this capacity for desire to lead us into growth and healing and transformation. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to sacrifice the present for the sake of a future when someday maybe if I have to, got to, must struggle and fight enough, I'll achieve this grand desire of millionaire or threesome or whatever the fuck. Right. So at this level, the danger seems to be the unruly ego seizing the day and taking people out of any possibility of fulfillment because there's always chasing. This is where most of my teachers get off the ride when it comes to polyamory. They're like, oh, it's just a level two behavior. It's just someone whose ego has gotten so big and they've fed their desire as an engine for their life that they don't realize that they're being played and they're not living their purpose. So, but I think that polyamory can actually be more than that. So level three is realizing, oh, I don't need to change any of my life conditions to be fulfilled. I'm whole, perfect, and complete right now. I can be, do, or have anything that I want, but if I burn my blueprint, be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. The one who realizes he has enough is truly rich. The Tao Te Ching. And at this level, it also seems like the pursuit of pleasure would be cool, right? But there's this capacity to embalm oneself in euphoria or jerk oneself off with joy. Okay, well, the universe is a giant wishbone. There's no sense of ecosystem here. And someone like, I'm one with everything. Well, if you're one with everything, then how do you configure yourself in relation to that everything so you're maximally contributing? Well, that question isn't getting asked. So you look at a lot of tantra teachers or communities or the spiritual community in general, like the conscious community. Like, oh, I'm just gonna do my thing. I'm in bliss already, so it doesn't matter. Well, it has an impact on the ecosystem. I cannot help but have an impact on those around me. So I can either choose to be responsible for that impact being uplifting or contributory or not. So maybe I can, instead of being journey oriented, where I'm just like here to experience everything and thrill and thrive and however anything goes, well, maybe there's a level four where I'm meant to overflow from that bliss out into the world in alignment with a purpose that serves everyone around us. At which point, yeah, it would start to make sense to regulate because I'm integrating what you've just given me into what I've already got in this framework. So thank you for your grace here and your generosity in listening. Like level four polyamory from that awareness would seem to be like, okay, there's some contribution to my soul, to their soul, to the world in general, that us exploring this space together is making. And I'm willing to regulate my behavior in relation to that ecosystem so it maximizes that contribution. So I'm rebuilding the blueprint. It's not just programming and trauma. It's like I'm aiming for something. I'm here for a reason. But wait, there's more, and then I can't wait to hear your response. So, level five is like you can't see a picture while you're inside of it. you can't see the part you're meant to play, if there is a part you're meant to play while you're in the movie. So maybe there's an infinite intelligence, there's a divine guidance that we can tune into moment by moment that dictates to us what decisions to make, what directions to take, and to put it casually, which people to stick our intimacy and love into, and when and why, right? So I see it's possible, and this was my like big sort of challenge to my social network a couple months ago was like I want to see someone who's living the fullest embodiment of their purpose, their prosperity, their surrender to intuition, who's also thriving in polyamory. And I had very particular, funny, I don't know if you remember this post, like very specific and funny, like financial earmarks. I was like, all right, so they got to be a 7 or 8 figure coach or whatever. And some people were just like, that's stupid. Why the fuck would you want that? And I'm like, aim at heaven and you'll get earth thrown in. Aim at earth, as most of the Tantra community seems to be doing, and you'll be broke and like chasing tail instead of chasing your purpose. So like anyway, I think the soul is going somewhere in the direction of level 5. I try to practice it. I practice it when I'm facilitating. But when it comes to my relationships, I'm still like level 4. And then when it comes to sexuality, I'm like 2 or 3. Anyway, so that's a bit of vulnerability. But did that land? How was that journey for you?
I like that journey. I like that journey. I'm curious what the framework is. I've not heard the levels in the way that you described them.
It's
I don't
from
know
If
if you're
I
familiar
Die
with
Before I
it.
Wake. It's the
Okay.
5 levels of my buddy Jonathan England. I can't run away from the distinction. It's so powerful. Even though where he personally takes it is he ends up with, oh, all these new age people are stuck in a swamp of confusion and disorientation, pretending that they're following God, whereas we should all follow Christ before the end times happen. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to follow that part of the ride, but the rest of it makes sense. So
Wow. Yeah, I really like this. The question of where is soul taking us, and then all of that framework that you just gave, and adding kind of where what non-monogamy might look like at each of them. It's really interesting. You give me that's a big old question there. I guess I feel moved first to speak about soul in my working definition of it, which is, so I mentioned the Animist Institute, the nature-based map of the human psyche. They This was started by Bill Plotkin, who's written several books, and it's all nature-based soul work. They do vision fast, they do all different kinds of immersive experiences, and it's all in dream work, but it's all in service to connecting with soul, and specifically in natural environments to facilitate that process. And so his definition of soul, and he's a Jungian depth psychotherapist, kind of before he became really, really committed to sort of helping grow us up out of the puerarchy. He's like, we're not in a patriarchy, we're in a puerarchy. And puer is like the Peter
child.
Pan, like the culture of adolescence. And so I think the underlying goal of his work is like connecting with soul, but going through this eco soul centric developmental wheel so that we can actually become adults and true elders. And I would say probably at those those early levels that you're speaking to, I wouldn't be surprised if it sort of mirrored these stages on that wheel where it's like this is like uncultivated. We're moving towards adulthood, and definitely in Western culture, it's like we're pretty largely stuck in adolescence. Um, so he would say, with the definition of soul being your eco niche,
Hmm.
so it's like, like a bumblebee has a particular eco niche. There's like a very specific role, but it's not just that there's that one bumblebee in its eco niche of soul is the only one doing that, right? It's like there's all the bumblebees that sort of like share this like over soul, but then there's like little individual characteristics of them. Um, so I like that term because it feels very anchored in the 3D. And I think of soul as the sort of earth based uh, larger than ego connection, and spirit being, the top of that vertical axis. And so if spirit is moving us towards that oneness consciousness, if our connection with spirit is like, okay, we're here in these bodies, we have the illusion of separation, but how can we practice and operate in this interdependent lens of like we are one body, um, you know, at a certain level throughout all the cosmos. It's one thing. So that feels like spirit, and soul feels like the like bring it down into some doing the like underworld work, or like really like getting our hands dirty with being on this planet and finding out like what is my eco niche as an individual within this larger ecosystem of oneness. Like there's all of these unique distinct flavors, and so for me moving towards soul is more and more clarity of um and it's beyond vocation. It's like he calls it the mythopoetic identity,
Mm.
like the underneath, like there's a lot of modes of delivery, but like what's actually like the deep soul calling underneath it. And um in terms of polyamory, I really love that description of like it can look all these ways, and it might look different depending what level we're at, or where we're at on the wheel, or what we're using it in service to. But if I think about that mirror metaphor and getting to explore, and I keep wanting to emphasize this, whether it's polyamory or just a version of monogamy that's not so insulated from the rest of society, or that doesn't limit our platonic relationships in such a way that we don't actually get the full experience of being mirrored to each other. This whole spectrum of how we can open the aperture. But my experiences, all of that serves me to get closer to soul, because I'm getting more views, both soul and spirit. It's like I'm getting more, I'm getting to look through more sets of eyes at like, okay, what does oneness look like expressed in this way and in this way and in this way? And how does my soul and my being express in connection with this person and this person and this person? And then I'm like filling it in to be like, okay, that was just what this soul connection woke something up in me that helped me remember something about who I am. And it's not actually about now I need to like marry whatever this person. Like,
Yeah.
you're going to be a person that I'm like, all right, all in. We're on the same path. We're doing the same thing. I don't know for sure, but I sense it. Um, I would like that. But like, it feels like it can inherently take the larger view, spiritual or soul based view, to engage in non monogamy if we're not trying to make all of those relationships about anything other than this is an ally on my path.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, like, so that to me, so far the feedback loop is positive. Just like I feel more of myself, like I have more of myself. um and I don't want to say that as though like that's not dependent on non-monogamy by any means, but it's been a tool that the data has showed that it's like, cool, I get to collect parts of myself in the things that come through different kind of like alchemical containers. Like it's like two souls coming together, to me feels like if they're really have something there to teach each other, it's an alchemical process. And I think that process can be accessed at varying degrees depending on the nature of the relationship. But I'm just not inclined to limit the container so much, because I'm like, oh, there's a portal here. Let's
Hmm.
go through the portal and see what happens. But let's not cause harm and destruction along the way if we can help it. That's the balance, I think.
I had a
to
suspicion.
self or other.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to say to self or other.
Hmm. I had a suspicion we would land in a similar place, and the way that it occurs for me is like, what are you choosing to use this for? It's a question
Mm-hmm.
my teachers often bandy about, and it's like, what do I choose to use this capacity for extended or expanded relating, we might call it? Like, what am I choosing to use it for? And I think some people are, probably a great many people are, using it to go further unconscious and to run away from actual spiritual growth through blotting out their own pain with pleasure and like multiplying trauma through chaotic, unstable, often dramatic relationship challenges that are being caused through the choice of this pattern of relating or this portal being open to someone who's not maybe not ready for it or not ready to be responsible for it. And that's the low side, right? So the high side sounds like and seems to be that it is and has been for you and could be for our listeners. Here's here at the end, a tool for spiritual growth. So, any punctuation marks you want to put on that before we conclude, or
I just love that question so much. Like, what are we using it for? Because that's I tend to, uh, astrological chart again. There's a lot in my world that's like exploring the taboo. And I view everything as in that same category. Like, we could use anything for any means,
Mhm.
And one thing I was going to say earlier that, kind of around the desire piece is for me, my highest, if not the highest value is consent. And everything that falls under that is like the content of how we do what we do and what we do in our relationships and what we do in our sex and what we do in our work or our art or anything. Like, none of the content of it matters. It's like, is it consensual? You know, for my self care with my whole self, or if I'm in relationship, is like, and I talk about this a lot with kink, is like, I don't see anything as inherently like good or bad. It's when it crosses the line into like somebody didn't consent to this. And now we're out of like a universal law from my perspective. Um, so I just like the way you framed the question, because I feel like it's a really valid one to ask when we're doing anything. Like, what am I doing this for? Because I could use it to serve love. I could use it to serve fear and separation. Same exact thing. Um, and I guess I also want to say that, I definitely don't want my sharing of my experience with it and whatever my sort of like path with it is to like make it seem easier or harder than it is. I just know that it's aligned for me, and um and that, even if it's got so much juice, like there's like all the foundational skills, um that building them slowly over years can like hold the potential of what's there,
Mhm.
like without blowing our systems out, you know like, won't get into the whole upper limit thing, but there's that too of like expanding and starting to take in more love. There's the aspect of being triggered by things that don't feel good, but then also by things that do feel good. And like, what is it? It's like I've had to go slow and learn when I went too fast, and like really notice like, oh, this is about opening to more love coming from inside of me and outside. And like, that's going to hit some really deep fear survival places. There's like ego deaths along the way, and the stakes of like loss and all of that. So I guess I just want to name that to honor like my own experience, and probably on some level all of our human experiences with like reaching bliss states or ecstasy or pleasure, and like hitting the place where suddenly that becomes a very scary thing. um And I don't think that's something to like bypass or take lightly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just how good are you willing to have it, it's what is your capacity and
Mhm.
calibrating to that capacity on the journey. And then I also hear you in the conversation of like don't think that it's going to be easier or harder depending on hearing our conversations about it. I think Nietzsche put it really well. Here is my way. Where is yours? So like just take what you've gotten here, y'all, and enjoy it insofar as you practice monogamy, non-monogamy, whatever else. Yeah, you look like you had one more though. What was there?
Oh, with the, I don't want it to make it sound easier or harder. The harder piece, like it's effort. It requires skill sets that are effort, but I also, I guess I just want to like end on the note of like, and it doesn't have to be hard and painful any more than any relational practices. Like, that's not my experience of it now. Like, it's just like, oh, this just kind of works. So it's like distinguishing between like, if we're making the right effort, it should feel really hard. Like, I feel like I just want to like
Hmm.
open the aperture for like, sometimes like all the skills come together and things pop open in a way that are like way more seamless than we ever expected.
Mhm.
Um, so like, all possibilities are on the table.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, like, if it appears without, though it is within, then if we do the work within, then we won't have to go without when we look without. I mean, we are actually be resourced. And then you have a course, don't you? I don't know when in relation to this podcast it'll be live, but would you like to speak to
Yeah.
the thing that you're making that'll incarnate the body of work and wisdom that you are?
So my business partner, Kyle Lovett, not Lyle Lovett, but Kyle Lovett, great name. Her and I are the co-founders of Holistic Kink, and we are creating a course on consensual non-monogamy for a platform called The Natural Art of Being Alive, or NABA, NABA. And it's an education-based social platform, and we are likely in January recording it. So I'm not sure exactly the timeline, but it'll come out probably in the first half of 2025. I'm assuming late winter or spring 2025. And there's lots of like resources and readings in there. It's a short course, but then there's a bunch of like supplemental material. And um, our Holistic Kink brand is also in the midst of incubating into an expansion to cover a lot more topics around relationships and specifically kind of alternative relationship styles. So we will be, if you want to learn more about our evolution towards curriculum and offerings and events, um, that speak more specifically to non-monogamy in addition to conscious kink and several other things, you can join our newsletter and we'll send out updates on what we got coming up, including kink tank.
Fantastic. She said it again. And Ashley, you like to play on Facebook, I've noticed. Is that correct?
Once in a while once in a while I kind of like slowed down during the pandemic. It became more of a war zone than ever. I was like, wow, this is actually like a battleground right now. So,
Still
you
is.
know, but I drop a stone in the in the lake every so often.
Yeah, that's
See
fun.
where it goes. Yeah, and post events and things there. That's a good place to follow for anything I might have going on. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being you. Thank you for contributing your voice, expertise, your experience. It's been enlightening and enlivening. And yeah, you're welcome back. I think there's far too many threads that we opened to actually cover, and this has been the longest recording I've ever done for this podcast so far. So well
Yeah.
done. I was charmed into rolling those what do you call it? Goalposts over and over. I was just like, no, this is good. Let's keep going. So anyway, y'all, thanks for listening. We love you. God bless. Godspeed. Good luck. Make love easy. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And just thank you again, Ashley.
Thank you, Lewis. That was so enjoyable.
Go
Yeah.
team.